Hello, Intro to Native American Languages. This is your instructor, Amy Lyons-Ketchum, and this module, we are talking about the Iroquoian languages. So the Iroquoian language family does not cover as large of an area as the Athabascan and the Algonquin languages that we studied previously. The Iroquoian language family is centered on the eastern part of North America, and it really has a concentration in the north with a couple groups in the south. And it spans the United States and Canada. So Cherokee was first documented by Europeans in the 1600s in the Appalachian Mountains. Western Cherokee was documented in Arkansas in 1794. As we know, the Trail of Tears removed the Cherokee from their homelands to Oklahoma in 1838 and 1839. The very first North American language documented by Europeans was Iroquoian language, Laurentian, in 1534. And when we talk about the Iroquois, you'll often hear about the 5 nations. So the Iroquois of the Iroquois, that would be the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk. And these groups together make up a larger ethnic group known as the Iroquois, and their languages are Iroquoian languages. So here is the breakdown of the languages and dialects of the Iroquoian language family. Note that the stars next to certain ones mean that there are no longer any reported first language speakers of these languages. In linguistics, we would call this a sleeping language. Commonly, you might hear it described as a dead language or a extinct language. However, linguists, especially linguists that work with actual communities, try to avoid using dead and extinct, other death terms when talking about languages, in part because it's disrespectful, in part because it implies that it is unsalvageable, but also because many of the cultures that claim these languages have taboos against touching or using dead things. And so therefore, you're setting up a cycle that will discourage members of the community from wanting to work with the language by describing it as such. So in linguistics, we talk about sleeping languages and awoken languages. And so you can think of it this way: a language is not really dead until there's nobody left that knows anything about it. For example, we talk about Latin being a dead language, but is it really? There's millions of people that use words from it every day. We can see how it has evolved into other languages like French and Spanish and Portuguese. And there's terms that we use all the time like quid pro quo or tempus fugit. So there's all these parts of it that we use. So for languages like Wyandot, Laurentian, and Nottoway, instead of talking about them as dead or extinct, we'll talk about them as sleeping, because something that is asleep can be reawoken. And as a matter of fact, there's quite a few people working on revitalizing the Wyandot language, and so therefore is not really dead, it is just sleeping. Okay, so back to our breakdown of the Iroquoian language family. We have different branches on this language family tree. So you have the Southern Iroquoian, the Proto-Lake Iroquoian, and the Northern Iroquoian. And so Southern would be Cherokee, and you have the Eastern and Western dialects. Proto-Lake would be Huron Wyandot, and those are 2 dialects, Huron and Wyandot. You have the Laurentian, and which has Iroquois proper, Seneca, and Cayuga as its dialects. You have Onondaga. Ooh, let's see if I can say this one. Susquehannock, Oneida, Mohawk, which is probably one of the more famous of the Iroquoian languages, with Cherokee, Seneca, and Cayuga. And then you had the Northern Iroquoian, Tuscarora, and Nottoway. And so if we go back to our map, we can see the Southern languages, the Eastern and Western Cherokee. You can see the Lake languages right here. So here are some examples of Iroquoian languages being spoken. And so if you click on the different links, it'll bring you to YouTube, and you can see very short clips of people using.
If you're a woman over 40 and you want to belly fat, stop doing endless workouts. Want to know fat?
Once the ads are skipped. So here is Mohawk.
Both know how easy as Arians.
Don't understand.
Only Sassanoda.
So anyways, if you click on the different links in this presentation, you will be able to hear spoken examples of the different languages. I recommend that you click on the links and that you listen to them, not only because it's important for a class, but because these are creators who are putting stuff out there in their languages, and it's really important that we show support to that. So other creators, other language learners, other tribal members, and people who are working hard to revitalize their languages or get information about their languages out there can know that there are people that support them. So I highly recommend you at least listen to all of these. Feel free to leave a like. So now we have examples, written examples of the Iroquoian languages. And the most famous of which is going to be the Cherokee syllabary. So the Cherokee syllabary was created by a Cherokee man, Sequoia, and the syllabary represents the sounds, both a consonant and a vowel together. That's a syllabary. It represents two sounds, a consonant and a vowel, or just a vowel. And so the syllabary has been used for a very long time. There are materials written just in the Cherokee syllabary. And then below we have an example of Seneca. And other Iroquoian languages have also decided to use the Latin alphabet with diacritics. And diacritics would be things like the the apostrophes showing glottal stops, things like the accents over vowels to show if they're long or short or nasalized. So here's some linguistic examples of the Iroquoian languages. So the phonetic inventories, so these are the sounds. So Iroquoian languages have a fairly small phonetic inventory. They don't have as many sounds as other languages. And there is some vowel variation across the languages. So this means that you can have long vowels and short vowels. This means you can have nasal vowels. Cherokee has a sound that's not found in some of the other Iroquoian languages. The official name of this sound is a lateral affricate or a lateral fricative. And so here's the IPA symbol for those. You see the T with the L with the little curlicue in the middle. It's called a barred L. And then here's just the L right here. And this is also found in southeastern languages like Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek. So what is this sound? It is kind of the hl sound, hl, that you get. this sound is not found in other Iroquoian languages, but is found in other southeastern languages. So it is possible that this was borrowed from their neighbors and not something that developed completely on its own, or something that's the result of sound changes over time. Like we talked about historical linguistics. In historical linguistics, one of the things we study is how sounds change over time. But I think this is more of a case of borrowing from our neighbors. And it's important to note that these sounds here at the top, these are not every single sound, but these are the sounds that are common across the Iroquoian languages. So here is some morphology, so verbs and nouns, linguistic examples, and we're going to use Cayuga as the language that we speak about. So verbs in Iroquoian languages are very complex. The verb is made of a verb root, that it requires a pronominal prefix that refers to core arguments. So this is like what we talked about in the Algonquin languages. These verbs are polysynthetic. And you have your verb root, and you have things that must be prefixed on the beginning and must be suffixed on the end. It's not a choice, you have to do it. So they have to have a pronominal prefix. So this pronominal prefix that attaches to the front of the verb root is going to tell you your subject and your direct objects, and your indirect object, maybe even, of your sentence. So instead of being a separate word, it's going to be a prefix onto the front of the verb. And there's multiple prefixes and suffixes, so you can stack them up really big and get a really big word for the verb of the sentence. Tense is a suffix, so past tense, future tense, but that's the same in English. We put ing onto a verb to show that it's present tense. We put ed on the end of a verb to show it's past tense. So this is something familiar to us. They also have derivational suffixes. So derivational suffixes change the verb. So for example, there's one suffix that makes it to become. So maybe raining is the verb, and you can add this suffix and it will become raining. It will start raining. You have an instrumental suffix. So this is like cut. So you add this suffix and you cut with a knife, or you cut with a rock, something like that. You have a causative. So this you see sometimes in Spanish, where instead of saying I broke my leg, you say my leg was broken. So there's a suffix in Iroquoian languages that can add to a verb that makes it caused by something else. And then the intensive suffix, and this is something we don't have in English really as a suffix, where it makes it more intense. It adds emphasis. We can do this by doing things like it's unfreaking believable. That adds emphasis, but it's not a true suffix or prefix that gets added onto our verbs. So there's also a prefix that can get added onto the front of a verb that makes an incorporated noun dual. So what does that mean? So we talked previously about incorporated nouns when we talked about polysynthesis, polysynthetic verbs. So in some languages, you can make a noun part of the verb. And so the example that you always hear is berry picking. So you take the word berry and you make it part of the verb, and so now you have a new verb called berry picking. Well, you can add this prefix onto a incorporated noun like this, a noun that has become part of a verb, to make it mean exactly two of that. So it doesn't really work with berry picking because you wouldn't really pick just two berries, but maybe buying. So I'm going clothes buying. So I've taken the noun clothes, I've incorporated it into a verb, and I have a new verb called clothes buying. And I'm going to add the prefix to on front of it because I'm buying exactly 2 pieces of clothing. It's really complicated. So nouns in Cayuga are actually really simple, and it makes sense because our verbs are so complex. Why would we want nouns to be complex too? You have a noun stem, which can also take prefixes and suffixes. And the types of prefixes you might see are things like gender. Is it masculine or feminine? Or number. Is it singular or plural? There's 3 genders in Cayuga: feminine, masculine, and neuter for nouns. And this is like if you've ever studied French or Spanish. Things are not really seen as being female or male. They're just categories of things. And German actually has 3 categories like this: the feminine, masculine, and neuter. English, we don't do gender categories. Our nouns only have 2 categories. Can it become plural or not? So, for example, chairs can become plural. So we call it a count noun. Or furniture. You can't really say furnitures, so it is a non-count noun. But a lot of European languages, a lot of African languages use the same kind of masculine, feminine, and or neuter, and more categories. So you can also add suffixes onto nouns, and so it says that there are noun markers and extensive noun incorporation. So because verbs are so complex, many nouns get incorporated into verbs to make those new verbs that have something to do with the noun. And so when we talked about verbs, we talked about it's required to have a pronominal prefix. And so this says that prefixes distinguish between agents and patients, who's doing the action and who has the action done to them. We would talk about the subject of a verb doing the action, she buys, and having the action done to you. That would make you the indirect object or the direct object, depending on what it is. Intransitive verbs, so verbs that have both a subject and a direct object. Pronominals show both the subject and the direct object. So that means that there's a pronominal prefix for just a subject and a different one that has a subject and a direct object. So let's learn a little bit about the current state of Iroquoian languages. So the Eastern Band Cherokee the Swimmer brothers are working really hard. They're both non-fluent speakers who work in North Carolina to teach Cherokee to adults and children. The Seneca have worked with the Rochester Institute of Technology. Their researchers are working with tribal members to use speech recognition technology to document and transcribe the Seneca language. And Tuscarora in Montgomery Hill, a tribal member and linguist in Montgomery Hill, is creating a talking dictionary of the Tuscarora language that will be mobile friendly. So there's a lot of good work going on in the Iroquoian languages. So this was the summary of the Module 5 lecture about the Iroquoian languages. If you have any questions, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me, and enjoy your spring break.